Montana Territory, 1887. The snow fell like ashes from a dying sky, muffling the forest in a silence so deep even the wolves held their breath. A red sun struggled behind the clouds, casting a pale, rust-colored glow over the pines and the frozen world beneath. The wind whispered low through the trees, and with it came the faint, sickly sweet scent of blood. Old blood, warm blood, human blood. Silas Creed limped through the knee-deep drifts, leaving behind a trail of crimson and crushed snow. His long buffalo hide coat was torn at the shoulder, soaked through with blood that was not his own. Across his back, the old Winchester rifle clung like a shadow, and around his waist, a belt of traps clinked softly with each step. His breath steamed from his lips like a dying man's prayer, slow and ragged, mixing with the cold. He reached the low cabin just as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Logs blackened with age, and soot made up its frame. One shutter hung crooked, rattling faintly. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. No fire burned inside. The trapper pushed open the door with his boot, and it creaked like a coffin lid. Inside, silence. Dust floated in the golden gloom. The place smelled of pine pitch, dry fir, and a faint trace of tobacco. Silas didn't light a lantern. He moved by memory, first to the fireplace, where he tossed in a handful of kindling and 2 logs, striking flint until a fragile flame came alive. Then to the table, where he emptied his pouch, 1 rabbit, a chewed leg of venison, and a pouch of bullets slick with blood. He didn't sit. He stared at the floor, where snowmelt pooled under his boots, pink and thin. Behind him, outside, a single wolf howled. The sound echoed down the valley like a widow's cry. He closed his eyes, and the cabin dissolved into firelight and screams. It had been 6 winters ago. The Lakota village sat in a clearing near Powder River. His wife, Mina, had grown up there, braids black as crow wings, hands soft from curing hides, her voice quiet but sure. Their boy, Elijah, had just turned 6. Silas had traded pelts in Miles City and returned with peppermint sticks for the boy and a ribbon for Mina's hair. But what he returned to was smoke, thick, choking, rising above the trees like the signal of some distant devil. He ran with a broken cry in his chest. By the time he reached the village, the soldiers had already mounted up. Blue coats, gold buttons, U.S. flags fluttering like death shrouds. Mina lay where she fell, clutching Elijah's hand. A bullet through the back. Her eyes still open. Elijah had no eyes left. The snow around them was the color of rust and roses. They said it was a raid, that the Lakota were harboring renegades, that Silas's family had been warned. He never spoke to a man after that. He vanished into the northern forests like a curse. No one saw him except the wolves, and even they kept their distance. He built traps, traded pelts in silence, and spoke only to the dead. Until yesterday. It had been in the foothills, near Whiskey Ridge. He found 3 men gutting a gray wolf they hadn't even shot clean, laughing, tossing its organs like toys. When Silas told them to stop, they laughed at him too. One drew a knife. Now 2 of them were dead. The 3rd fled, bleeding. And Silas had followed the blood trail all day through the snow. But as twilight deepened, he saw the prints scatter, vanish into stone and brush. He lost the scent near the creek, where the current hadn't frozen. He hadn't killed for 6 years. Now he stood over the fire, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the memories clawing their way up through his throat. He knelt beside the hearth and opened a loose plank in the floor. Inside lay a tin box. He hadn't touched it since that winter of fire and smoke. Inside, 1 folded photograph of Mina and Elijah, taken by a traveling photographer in Miles City. Her smile was small. His was crooked and proud. He traced their faces with a calloused finger. Beneath that, a small braid of Mina's hair, tied with a red ribbon. It still smelled faintly of cedar. And at the bottom, a bullet, hand-poured, polished, marked with a cross scratched by a blade. A bullet he had forged the night he buried them. He had sworn to use it on the last man who had ordered that raid, the officer whose name he knew but had never spoken aloud. He had told himself he would never hunt a man again, but now a 3rd man knew his face, and blood had awakened something he thought buried in the snow. He replaced the lid, stood, and unhooked the rifle from the wall. It was old but oiled, the lever action smooth. He pulled on his hat, thick with age and snow crust, and stood at the door. Outside, the forest was silent again. Moonlight bathed the pines in silver, and wind moved through them like breath across a wound. The trapper stepped outside, closed the door behind him, and tightened the leather strap across his chest. Not for justice, not for honor, but to forget the boy's missing eyes, and the way Mina's mouth had been open, as if calling his name. The wolves would understand. The wind shifted west as Silas crossed into the Gallatin foothills, days after blood first soaked his coat. Smoke trailed behind him, campfires, logging blazes, smelters cooking or deeper into the Rockies. His boots crunched over old frost and frozen pine needles, and the wolf hide slung over his shoulder stank of iron and snow. A lone hawk circled above as he approached the timber post at Pine Gulch, more of a glorified lean-to than a town. But here, whiskey flowed, rumors festered, and wanted men whispered things they ought not. He didn't speak as he entered, just laid 3 fox pelts on the plank bar and pointed to the bottle. The barkeep was older than the wood he stood behind, with eyes that flicked nervously toward the rifle on Silas's back. "Trader," the man asked. Silas said nothing. The barkeep poured the whiskey and added, "You'll want to stay off the roads west. Lot of bad breath coming from Gold Brush." That name struck like a match in dry hay. Silas raised an eyebrow. "Wyoming side," the barkeep continued, emboldened. "Used to be a placer camp. Now it's a stinkhole run by some ex-officer, calls himself Judge Harlan. Hangs miners for cheating cards, but keeps whores chained in tents. One of them camps where you walk in with gold and walk out a ghost." Silas didn't blink. "Harlan's his name, that's right. Served Union Blue back in the day. Ran out after the Lakota business. Some say he pulled triggers at Powder River." The glass was empty. Silas stood. He was gone before the barkeep realized the man never paid. 4 or 5 days. He rode the cold trail south through canyons and switchbacks where the trees grew crooked and mean. His horse was a raw-boned Appaloosa that didn't spook easy, one he'd found half dead in a snowbank 3 winters ago. Same as the wolves had found him once. It had been years back, the first full winter after Mina and Elijah. He'd collapsed from fever, deep in the timberline, lungs filled with frost and skin like ash. He'd crawled into a gully to die alone. But the wolves came first. A she-wolf and 2 young ones, lean with hunger. They circled but didn't attack. He remembered the heat of their breath, the way they huffed and paced around him, cautious. By dawn, they were gone. But their presence had kept away the coyotes, the cougars, and something colder, his own will to vanish. He woke angry to be alive. That rage carried him now. On the 6th day, he reached a valley where smoke curled up unnaturally. Not campfire smoke, more like burning cedar and rage. He smelled it before he heard it. A man's voice cussing, a girl crying. He slid from his saddle, tied the horse to a low fir, and moved through the underbrush without a sound. It was instinct now, like wolves moving through wind. The clearing opened to a homestead barely holding together, a small barn, a broken fence corral, and a sod-roofed house with its door swinging wide. 3 horses stood tethered, and 3 men, drunk or close, were circling a black man on his knees, blood dripping from his lip. A teenage girl clung to the porch rail, dress torn, eyes wide with salt and horror. One outlaw held a rope. Another held a bottle. The third had his hand on his pistol. "Where's the deed, old boy?" the first one mocked. "You ain't got claim on this land. Black man with a fence? That's a goddamn joke." The rancher tried to speak, but the boot hit his ribs. Silas moved like smoke. By the time the rope swung, he had crossed half the clearing. The first man turned, saw the figure in furs and frost, and laughed, until the rifle but broke his jaw clean sideways. The second reached for his gun. Silas shot him through the leg, low, deliberate. The man screamed, dropped his weapon, and tried to crawl. The third hesitated, but the cold in Silas's eyes, older than the war, deeper than the snow, froze him mid-draw. "Go," Silas growled. The outlaw didn't wait. He ran full tilt, left his horse behind. The one with the broken jaw moaned in a pool of blood. The one with the leg wound passed out. The rancher blinked up at Silas like a man seeing God or death. The girl stepped forward, clutching her shawl, lip trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. Silas didn't respond. He simply turned, walked back toward the brush, and disappeared. The Appaloosa snorted as he mounted. Wind picked up again, pulling the smoke across the hills. He did not look back. That night, he camped high on a ridge. A thin fire crackled beside a rock wall, casting flickering shapes into the dark. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The stars above looked like shattered glass. Silas pulled out Mina's ribbon from his coat pocket, unwrapped it from its leather bundle, and tied it once more around the stock of his rifle. For a long while, he sat still, bare fingers brushing the metal, breathing slow and deep. He hadn't meant to help that family. He hadn't gone looking for it. But something in the girl's eyes, the terror, the defiance, had turned his aim. It was not justice. It was instinct. Just like the wolves. He drifted into sleep as the moon climbed higher, and in his dream, he heard Mina's voice again. Not words, just the hush of her song, the one she used to hum while brushing their son's hair. The trail to Gold Brush waited. But something else had awakened now. Not rage, not yet mercy, but memory. The town of Gold Brush wasn't gold anymore. The seams had gone thin, and what was left trickled through the pockets of desperate men and meaner ones who ruled them. Perched in the crook of two ridges, the camp looked like a scabbed wound on the face of Wyoming. Black tents, warped cabins, and a single main road packed with mud and regret. Smoke curled from chimneys like bruised breath. What law once came with star or summons had long been buried beneath the weight of one man's word. They called him Judge Harlan. Major Lou Harlan, Union Blue, turned badge, turned tyrant. He didn't wear robes or speak from pulpits. His court was the saloon backroom, his verdict swift, and his gallows permanent. He'd built power the way men build railroads, straight, cruel, and without mercy. What he couldn't buy, he buried. Silas Creed arrived just after sundown, riding slow, his coat heavy with dust and snowmelt. He tied his horse near the livery without a word and walked the street like a ghost, boots sinking in cold mud, eyes beneath a battered brim scanning every window. No one stopped him. Strangers passed through often, most didn't last. He walked past the blacksmith's forge, past a collapsed church with stained glass replaced by tar paper, past a mercantile shuttered before dark. He stopped outside the saloon, the assayer's mercy. The sign read, though there was little of either inside. The piano played ragged and sharp. Laughter rang false through the smoke-hazed windows. Silas stepped in. The warmth hit first, then the stink. Whiskey, sweat, old tobacco, and something sour beneath it all, like rot covered in perfume. Faces turned toward him, then quickly turned away. Men at the bar whispered. Two gamblers in the corner froze mid-card. He moved to the far side, where the shadows pooled near the staircase. From here he watched the dealer with 3 knives hidden beneath his sash, watched the man nursing a bottle with his left hand, the right resting too casually on a sidearm, watched the bartenders gnaw to the upstairs window. He watched the woman descending the staircase. She wore red satin, faded at the edges. Her boots were worn. Her face bore the trace of youth buried beneath years of candlelight survival. And her eyes, wide, green, and cautious, froze when they landed on him. "Silas Creed," she said softly, more breath than voice. He didn't flinch. "I'll be damned. Or maybe I already am." She came closer, her voice steadying. "I knew it was you. Same look, like the war still marching behind your eyes." He said nothing. "You don't remember me," she said. He studied her face. There, behind the powder, behind the layers, a glint of memory. A girl in a Union tent, face smudged with ash, wrapping bandages, with shaking hands. She had sung to herself, old hymns, the kind that sounded like they remembered better days. "You were a nurse," he said. "Clara Voss, 17th Illinois, Field Hospital. You came in with shrapnel in your neck, and eyes full of fire. Didn't scream once." "I remember." She glanced around, lowered her voice. "You shouldn't be here, Silas. Whatever you're after, it ain't worth dying for." "I'm not here to die." "Then what?" He looked past her, toward the back room, where the door was shut and two armed men stood like statues. She followed his gaze. Harlan's got 20 men, all loyal. Hires boys who lost kin in the war and fills their heads with God and glory. Says he's the only law left west of the Bighorns. I know who he is. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He signed the order, didn't he? Silas didn't nod. Didn't need to. She touched his arm. There's no justice here, Silas. Only more ghosts. He stepped back. Then I'll give them company. That night, he didn't rent a room. He slept in the hills above the town, near the tree line, where the fire could stay low and the wolves wandered close. His rifle lay across his lap, and in the dark, he listened. The next day, he watched as the judge emerged from his backroom office, flanked by 2 guards. Broad-shouldered, silver-bearded, face lined by years and sun. Harlan wore his old officer's coat like armor. His voice carried like a preacher's. He watched the payroll wagon leave town, escorted by 3 riders. Watched the guard shifts at the jailhouse, the way Clara's eyes never quite stopped scanning doorways. That night, Silas moved. He set the first trap behind the livery, trip wire strung between 2 posts, hidden beneath a dusting of hay. The second near the saloon, a false step that would drop a man into the cold creek below. The third, an old wolf trick, placed meat laced with crushed belladonna, where only a greedy man would stoop. By dawn, 2 guards were down, one with a shattered ankle, the other vomiting blood. Panic stirred in the town. No one saw him. Clara found him at dusk, crouched behind a mercantile. You're making him nervous, she said. Good. He's calling in the rest. Guns from Cheyenne. Said someone's hunting him. He's right. She stepped close, her breath visible in the cold. He won't break. Not like the others. Harlan believes what he did was holy. He sleeps with a Bible and a pistol under his pillow. You won't get peace from that man. I don't want peace. Her eyes welled, but she said nothing. He stood, disappeared into the shadows. That night, the wolves howled. Not far, not near, just enough to remind the camp of things older and more patient than men. The townsfolk locked their doors. Clara watched the hills, lips moving in silent prayer. The judge loaded his revolver and stared out the window, remembering names he'd buried long ago. Silas watched from the ridge, eyes gleaming under the moon. The hunt had begun, and this time, it wasn't fur he was after. Snow fell in thin, wind-blown sheets across the ridge as the moon climbed over Goldbrush. The town below was a smear of orange light and black roofs, barely holding back the dark. Silas Creed moved through it like smoke, slow, silent, deliberate. The wolves had gone quiet. Only the sound of distant boots, creaking boards, and a faint bell from the mine carried through the night air. The first guard was easy. He stood by the water tower, stamping his feet against the cold, rifle dangling loose from his hands. Silas waited until the man turned toward the hills, then stepped from the shadows. The knife slid under the jaw and up, clean and soft. The body dropped without a sound. Silas eased it into the snow and whispered a single word only the dead could hear. He moved down the ridge, eyes steady, breath shallow. Each step left no trace. He'd learned long ago how to let the ground hold him. Another guard by the stable, half drunk, mumbling about ghosts. He didn't even see the snare until it closed around his throat and yanked him backward into the dark. A soft crack, and then stillness. By morning, 3 men were gone. By dusk, 2 more vanished from the night watch. The town whispered. Someone said wolves had come down from the mountains. Others swore they'd seen a spirit in a long coat and white hat, walking through snow without tracks. The judge doubled his men, posted torches along the street, and promised $50 to anyone who brought him the ghost's head. Clara heard the stories from the saloon window. She watched men disappear, one by one, until even the hardest killers avoided the edge of town. Fear had a shape now, tall, cold, human. She knew it was Silas before anyone else did. She found him near the creek, crouched by the water, cleaning his rifle beneath the whisper of pine. His coat was stiff with frost, his face hollow but alive in the firelight. "You're becoming the thing they say you are," she said quietly. Silas didn't look up. "They don't know what I am. I do. I saw it once, on a battlefield. You think killing will carve the rot out of your heart, but it just plants more. He checked the rifle's chamber, slid the lever smooth. You don't understand. I understand enough, she said. I know what he did. But this isn't justice. It's a grave you're digging while you're still standing in it. He finally met her eyes, the fire flickering in their depths. He took everything from me. I can't breathe with him still walking this earth. There's nothing left in you if you finish this, she whispered. You'll kill him and find out he's been dead in you for years. He turned away, jaw tight, and the conversation died in the cold air. Before dawn, the storm came. Snow thick as feathers swept the valley, blinding, silencing. Silas used it like a cloak. By the time the wind settled, half the torches in Gold Brush had burned out. The last guards held their rifles tight and prayed. Silas took them before the prayers reached heaven. One in the alley by the assay office, his breath froze mid-curse. Another on the roof of the saloon, fell into the drift without a scream. Each life taken with the same quiet certainty as setting a trap. No rage, no triumph, just necessity. When he reached the judge's house, the sky was pale and empty. The door was guarded by two men too tired to be brave. They fell quick and silent, and Silas slipped through the doorway into the hollow stillness beyond. The inside smelled of old whiskey and gun oil. A fire burned low in the hearth. Papers were scattered across the desk, maps, ledgers, letters from Washington, names of men who'd survived the war only to sell what was left of their souls. Lou Harlan sat behind the desk, silver hair glinting in the firelight. He looked older, heavier, but those eyes, the cold blue of command, hadn't changed. He didn't reach for his gun. He simply stared at the figure before him, the shadow that had haunted his nights. So it's true, he said softly. Creed, I thought you died with the rest of them. Not yet. Harlan poured a drink with hands that didn't shake. You want confession? I did what was ordered. I carried out the will of the Union, the law of the land. The war didn't end, it just changed its face. You murdered my wife and my boy, Silas said, voice low, ragged. You called it law. They were harboring hostiles, Harlan replied. You know what that meant then. We were told to clean the land before it turned to fire. They were 6 and 30, not warriors. Collateral, Harlan said, almost gently. There's no winning without sacrifice. I've paid for it every night since. Silas took a step forward, boots crunching on the wood, then begged forgiveness. Harlan smiled faintly, eyes glinting with something that might have been pity or pride. Forgiveness? For obeying? For doing what weak men couldn't stomach? You wouldn't have lasted a week in command. For a heartbeat, the fire crackled loud enough to drown the silence. Silas leveled the rifle. You killed everything that made me human. Harlan didn't flinch. No, Creed. You did that yourself. The shot was small, muffled, a single bloom of smoke and silence. The judge slumped sideways, the drink spilling into the fire, hissing out the last flame. Silas stood in the dark, breathing heavy. The rifle sagged in his hands. He expected something, release, collapse, peace. Instead, there was only the sound of the wind outside, the whisper of snow against glass. He turned to the window. The wolves were there on the ridge, dark shapes against the pale dawn. Watching, waiting. He holstered the rifle and stepped out into the storm. The wind tore at his coat, howling through the streets like a soul unchained. Behind him, Gold Brush slept uneasy. No one saw the man who walked away, leaving footprints that the snow swallowed whole. By the time the sun rose, even the tracks were gone. Only the wolves remained, their cries rolling down from the hills, carrying the name of a man who'd hunted too long and found nothing worth keeping. The storm had broken by dawn. The world lay washed clean, silent beneath the thin blue sky. The cabin he'd taken above Gold Brush was half buried in drift, its roof creaking under the weight of snow. Silas Creed packed his satchel slowly, methodical as always, cartridges, jerky, knife, compass, the ribbon tied to his rifle stock. He didn't look back at the valley. What he'd done there would rot quietly in the ground with the man he'd killed. The dead didn't need witnesses, and he'd long ago stopped asking the living for forgiveness. He saddled the Appaloosa and started down the slope, his breath curling white in the cold. Wolves watched from the tree-line. 3 of them, one black, one gray, one pale as mist. They didn't follow, only watched, as if deciding whether he still belonged among them. For a time, Silas thought maybe he did. He'd buried the last of his purpose beside the judge's cold body, and what remained was instinct. He would head north, find the high country again, vanish into it. But fate has a way of finding men who no longer want to be found. The first sign was the cry, a thin, high sound breaking across the wind. Not an animal, a child. Silas pulled his horse up short and listened. The echo came again from the ravine below. He dismounted, rifle in hand, and followed the sound through the snow. At the bottom, half hidden under a fallen pine, he found a boy, 10, maybe 11. Dark hair tangled, one cheek cut, clothes torn near to rags. A trap was clamped around his leg, rusted iron, not his own doing. The boy's eyes flashed wide when he saw Silas. He didn't scream, just stared, breathing quick through chapped lips. Silas knelt beside him, jaw tight. "Easy, son," he said softly. He pried the jaws apart, metal squealing, then pulled the boy free. The wound was deep but clean. "You're Lakota?" Silas asked. The boy nodded, hesitant. "Half," he whispered. "My ma was Sioux. My pa, he's gone." "What's your name?" "Wicasa." Silas's hand paused mid-motion. That was the old word for man. "Who left you here?" The boy hesitated, eyes darting toward the north. "Men from the valley. Said I was bad luck." Silas bound the leg tight, tore a strip from his coat sleeve. "You'll freeze out here," he said. "There's a cabin west. You can walk." The boy nodded bravely, though his legs shook with pain. They reached the cabin by dusk. Smoke curled thinly from the chimney as Silas lit the fire. The boy slept almost instantly, curled near the hearth like a small animal, breath steady. Silas sat watching him for a long while. The boy's face in the firelight, sharp chin, round cheeks, a small scar over the eyebrow, was a ghost from a life buried 6 winters ago. Elijah. He swallowed hard and looked away. The next day, he saddled the horse to leave. The boy woke as he tightened the girth. "Where you going?" "North." "Can I come?" Silas didn't answer. The boy limped toward him, eyes steady. "You saved me. You're supposed to stay." Silas looked at him long and hard. "I don't stay nowhere." "Then I'll follow." He would have ridden off anyway if the letter hadn't come that night. Clara's handwriting was rough, smeared by haste. She'd sent a rider from Gold Brush before the thaw. "Bounty men coming, 4 of them. Cheyenne guns. Price on your head. They say you killed an officer. Asterisk, asterisk." Silas burned the letter in the fire. He looked at the sleeping boy. The cracked leg brace he'd built. The quiet rise and fall of small shoulders under a wool blanket. He felt the old chill of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Not fear, but duty. By morning, the wolves were howling again. He took the boy out back and showed him how to hide. "There's a hollow under that log," he said. "You hear gunfire. You don't move. You don't make a sound till I come back." "What if you don't come back?" Silas handed him a knife, handle worn smooth by years of use. "Then you run east. Follow the river. Don't stop till you see smoke from a big town." The boy nodded once, solemn. "You talk like my father used to." Silas froze, then brushed snow from the rifle barrel. He must have been a hard man. "He was," the boy said quietly, "but kind." Before noon, the bounty men arrived. 4 riders, cloaked in fur, rifles gleaming. They spread through the trees like wolves of their own kind, slow, cautious, scenting the air. Silas watched them from the ridge above, the snow crunching faintly beneath their boots. The first died in silence, snare wire drawn across the path, snapping tight around his throat. The second found his partner's boot print and knelt to inspect it, never seeing the shadow behind the spruce. The crack of the rifle echoed once, flat and sharp, then was swallowed by the wind. The other 2 scattered. One rode toward the stream, the other doubled back toward the cabin. Silas followed the rider upstream, moving through the snow like a ghost. He let him dismount, Let him breathe once, twice, before stepping from behind the tree. The man turned too late. The rifle but hit bone. The snow drank the sound. Then the shot came from behind. It caught Silas in the shoulder, spun him sideways. He dropped into the drift, blood blooming against white. The last bounty man stood 20 yards away, pistol smoking. "You Creed," he called. "They said you was dead." Silas gritted his teeth, clutching his shoulder. "They say a lot." The man advanced, smirking, boots crunching steady. "I'll make it quick, old-timer. Ain't personal. They just pay good for ghosts." He raised his gun, and from the tree-line, a low growl rolled through the air, deep, primal, cold as the wind. 3 wolves stepped from the brush, fur bristling, eyes bright with hunger. The bounty man turned, fired once. Missed. Another growl, closer now. Silas pushed himself up, blood running warm down his sleeve. He steadied his rifle against the snow and fired. The bullet took the man clean through the chest. He dropped without a word. The wolves didn't move toward Silas. They stood watching, ears flicked back, as if waiting for permission. He lowered the rifle. "Go on," he murmured. "Ain't no more left to kill." They slipped back into the forest without a sound. Silas staggered to his feet, clutching the wound, and made his way back to the cabin. He found the boy crouched by the fire, knife still in hand, eyes wet. When he saw Silas, he rushed forward, helped him to the chair with small, shaking hands. "You're hurt," the boy said. "I've been worse. You came back." Silas looked at him, really looked. The dirt on his face, the fear, the stubborn hope. He thought of Mina's eyes, of Elijah's laughter in the tall grass before the soldiers came. The pain in his shoulder was distant compared to the ache rising in his chest. "You should have run," he said. The boy shook his head. "You told me not to till you came back." Silas tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The fire popped. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and quiet. He reached out, placed a rough hand on the boy's hair. "You did right, son." The boy looked up. "Father." The word hit like a hammer made of air, no weight, but enough to crush what little wall he had left. He swallowed hard, throat burning. "Yeah," he said finally, voice rough as gravel. "Yeah, boy." They sat in silence as night deepened around them. The wolves howled somewhere far off, their cries carrying through the dark, wild and endless. Silas listened with his eyes closed. For the first time in years, the sound didn't feel like morning. It felt like home.